Now we're going to put the buttons on. You can put 3 buttons. I think for the smaller sizes that really doesn't work so well because it's just, you know, not enough. 2 buttons can look rather odd, so on a very small size I probably would go just for the 1 button and keep it nice like that. So now we're going to mark the buttonhole on your pattern. Let's have a look here. We have got a 1 centimeter seam allowance and then 1.5 centimeter distance to the buttonhole. The reason being that if you have a big button, you want it to sit that 2 millimeter away from the edge. So your button should sit right on there. If you have a smaller button, you could move a little bit closer to the edge. But I have a big button, so I'm going to stick with the markings on my pattern. And I'm going 1.5 centimeters away from the edge here. And that's roughly where I'm going to put my buttonhole. Let's have a look. If I put my button on here, I want my little button stand here to be exactly on there, right? So that's perfect. Actually, that's good. It needs to have that distance for a big button. Otherwise, the button will sit over the edge. You don't want that. And then I also need to mark the distance. Okay, so for everyone that's never done this before, if you just do it like that, so you go on either side, that will give you a little bit extra. My button actually is, hang on a minute, 2.2. So the buttonhole that I've marked here should be 2.4 really. And I can mark it across so I can just see it. And again, I'm using a textile marker. This is disappearing ink, so don't use a felt tip. I'm going to use a buttonhole foot from my puff machine. I'm not using my electronic buttonholer. I actually prefer these ones because if you, for example, touch anything on the machine when you're using the digital one, the buttonhole stops, and you will have this experience, I'm sure, once you've done a few buttonholes where you say, oh, my buttonhole is either way too long or it's way too short. So I prefer the mechanical machines to do this, even though you have to pay more attention to what you're doing. So if I put this on, I can see this is 1 centimeter, 2, that's 2.5, and I just want to stop right shy in front of that. And that will be the length of my buttonhole. So I'm going to start it and then go down and back up. The first thing to do is to unclip your normal foot and get on that buttonhole foot here. Right, so you want this little gauge here to face the front and your marking to face the left side of yours. On my sewing machine I've got C, B and A, or 1, 2 and 3, and 1 goes down the right side of the buttonhole, and then 2 does the tab or the tag that goes from side to side, and then A comes back up on the other side, after which we're going to do the tag again. That's the first thing I have to know about mine. So if you don't have a puff, of course on yours it'll be different. You need to make sure that the stitch length is down. So I'm going to go to buttonhole, and you can go all the way down here, then it will be very tight, or you stay up there and then it'll be a little bit looser. So I'm going to go halfway. Then I've got these 2 dials on the top of the machine. This is for zigzag stitch, and of course I want to go all the way over, in my case to 5, and that's just where my needle position is, so that stays as it is. Another very important point is for any buttonhole is that the tension needs to go down. On my machine it's marked as a buttonhole tension, so you know, and most machines will have that. And if you try to do it without the buttonhole tension, it will not look very nice. So my first step is to put my fabric here in very, very flat, just so it's perfect. And I can see where my line is going across and my line down. There we go, and I'm moving it up a bit because I want that to be right on where I drew the line. It's not quite so important when you have only 1 buttonhole, but if you have more than 1, then it would be very important. The next step is to lift your presser foot and move it down to where your mark is, in my case here, just before the 2.5, and put it back down. Regardless of sewing machine, make sure that your grain line runs along here. I can see it, so you don't do that. Yeah. So you keep it very straight on either side. Make sure it's nice and flat. Have your hands on either side of your sewing machine. And then when I get to the end here, put in my little bar, press the other one down, that goes back up, and come back up. Bar again. There we go. A few stitches on the spot, and you are done with your buttonhole. So now I've got my buttonhole. I need to cut it open. There are a couple of ways in which you can do this. One is using a seam ripper, and the other one is using a scissor. If you're going to use a seam ripper though, I would really recommend that before you go in with a seam ripper, you put a pin across the top here, so that if accidentally you slip, you don't rip right into your fabric. I'm not using that. I always like to use my big scissor, but I'm a tailor, so I would use a really small embroidery scissor if you have one. I actually don't have one myself, so what I'm doing is I'm folding over my buttonholes so they sit on top of each other, and then I do a tiny little snip through the center. You can see here I've really cut it a tiny little bit. You have to be very careful when you cut this open. Very slowly cut from one end to the other, straight through the center. Final step is to actually put on the little button. The basic overlap is 3 centimeters, and then you want to grab yourself your needle, double thread and a knot in the end, and here's my button that I want to put on, and I'm just going to go straight through to the end of my buttonhole. And wherever that goes to is here. It'll actually be not so close to the edge on yours. This is my starting jacket before I started messing about with the pattern. So you've actually got it further over, which is a little bit nicer. And now I'm just going to sew my button on. You want to go through all the way to the other side and then through the button. You're going to do that quite a few times. You don't want this to rip off. And then you wrap around here, get a loop, needle through the loop, pull your thread away anywhere in the jacket as far as it will go, cut off your thread, and basically that is your jacket done. Oh, that is so cute. I think you need to give yourself a pat on the back if you've gotten this far. This is great. Let's turn these up for the full effect. And that is the end of your jacket. I hope you enjoyed this, and you're back for the next project.